just a little bit about the UN Global Compact. Apologies to those of you that were here for our last webinar or already know about us. We know that there will be quite a few people attending that are not currently participating in the Global Compact, and that's something we are keen to remedy. So the Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. There are over 12,000 businesses around the world that are participating, and another 3,500 plus non-business organizations. We launched 20 years ago when Kofi Annan sought to create a global compact between business and the UN to project universal values through business around the world in order to put a human face on global markets. Next slide, please, Carla. Those principles were all derived from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And you can see them there. And next slide, Carla. And to join the Global Compact, basically the CEO of your organization needs to make a commitment in a letter to the Secretary General to operationalize those 10 principles throughout the organization. There's a requirement to report annually on the progress you're making towards doing so, and a commitment to supporting the wider UN development agenda. Global Compact doesn't just leave our participants there, though. We provide a really broad program of activity at both the global level and the local levels to support companies and other organizations that are participating. There are 68 local networks around the world. So in whatever country you might be in now, or where your organization may have operations, there's a very good chance that there's a Global Compact network there that can support your work. Here in the UK, we organize, well, this is a special year because we've been very active online, over 50 events this year to support our members across a wide range of issue areas. And I think they find they get good value from their participation with us. And if you are UK based, we'd love to hear from you if you'd like to learn more. Next slide, please. When I said we cover a wide range of issue areas, we were all very moved by the Black Lives Matter protests across the US and here in the UK. And we feel this is an issue that is very closely linked to our core mission. You can see here where we've highlighted which of our 10 Global Compact principles are directly linked to the Black Lives Matter agenda, and you can see how they map across to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we certainly feel this is a highly relevant issue for our members, and we hope that you agree. And judging by the interest the webinar series has generated so far, it does appear that that is the case. Next slide, please, Carla. So what's actually a little bit maybe specifically about this webinar series. After the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests around the world, I think we were all on the team moved by that, and some particularly so, and we felt a strong need to show some leadership in this area, taking to heart the idea that it's not simply enough to be not racist, but that we needed to be actively anti-racist. And so the idea then was born that we would develop a webinar series that would move this agenda along and translate some of the demands being voiced by the Black Lives Matter movement into practical actions that business could take to make a real impact on bringing equality and improving the lot of our Black colleagues wherever they were working. And so here's a slide just showcasing a few images that might give you some food for thought. I was in a chat group just yesterday, where someone had the temerity to talk about White Lives Matter. And it was really a relief to see when I shouted that down, taking to heart the need to be anti-racist, that others piled in behind me. So I think we've got a really important movement here. Just this morning, I'll save that comment. Next slide, please, Carla. So as I mentioned, this is a 6-part webinar series. We launched back on the 15th of September with a really moving session, I think, where we had Baroness Lola Young and 3 successful young professionals sharing some stories from their working lives of some of the challenges that they have faced in coping with dealing with conscious and unconscious bias in their careers. Today, we're going to talk about where to get started. And to that's this anecdote I started. I read an article this morning about from the States of the Wells Fargo CEO who had put out a memo justifying a lack of diversity in their company's senior management by the very limited pool of Black talent to recruit from. That was a quote from him. And just how that throws up a number of challenges. Obviously, that's quite demoralizing for the Black talent that is in his staff. But equally, I think it presents a challenge because clearly there's not been a strong enough pipeline to help Black talent advance. And so that brings us to today, is just where to start. How does a company that is perhaps not given this issue the attention it deserves just get started on the road to changing their policies and practices and corporate culture? So we're really looking forward to today's session. Sessions to come over the course of the next 2 months, we'll go deeper into some of those issues around recruitment, retention, advancement, and we're going to finish up on the 24th of November with a high-level panel, a CEO panel, talking about changing corporate culture from the top. With that, I'm very happy to hand over to my colleague Carla, who will be moderating the rest of the program, and she'll walk you through the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. We have a packed agenda ahead of us today, so let me just briefly take you through it. So as you will notice, we have decided to center this webinar around 3 main topics. The first one is language and terminology on race in the workplace. So we've noticed that it's really good that more businesses are now talking about racism, but many still feel discomfort when bringing up the subject, especially around the language that they should be using in these contexts. So how can employers make sure that they use these terms and language correctly and avoid being reductionist or even offending their employees? On this note, we are delighted to have Sandra Kerr, who is the Race Equality Director from BITC, and she will deliver a few remarks on this. Secondly, how can businesses ensure that the D&I training they offer to their employees is really hitting the mark and encouraging not just non-racist but anti-racist behaviors? Our second speaker for the day, Russell J. Thomas, will be talking more about this topic. And finally, how can businesses get started on collecting meaningful D&I data, including ethnicity pay gap reporting, and what are the benefits and challenges of taking this step? Emma Codd, Deloitte's Global Inclusion Leader, will provide some insights into this topic based on the time she spent working at Deloitte UK as their managing partner for talent. After this, we will take your questions, which you can send through at any time through the Q&A box on your screens. And we will then engage in a short Q&A session before delivering a few final remarks. As you may have seen by now, we have a brilliant speaker lineup for today's session. Our first speaker of the day is Sandra Kerr. Sandra is Business in the Community's Race Equality Director, and before joining BITC, Sandra worked in the Cabinet Office advising on diversity and inclusion. She then joined the Business in the Community Race Equality Campaign as the National Campaign Director, where she worked with the Race Advisory Board to set the agenda for issues around race and employment in the UK. And in 2019, she was awarded the CBE for services to equality and diversity. On the line today, we also have Russell J. Thomas. Russell is Director and Senior Consultant at Diversity Trust, an organization which provides equality, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility training and consultancy. He also works as Equality, Diversity, Inclusion, and Wellbeing Manager at the University of Exeter. And he has extensive knowledge and experience in inclusion, well-being, and safeguarding within a variety of sectors, including private, social enterprise, and voluntary sectors. And last but not least, Emma Codd is a global inclusion leader for Deloitte, and she leads on the development and delivery of the global inclusion strategy, with a primary focus on gender and LGBT plus diversity and mental health. She used to be a managing partner for talent for Deloitte in the UK, and she sat on the firm's executive committee. During this period, she led significant change for the firm from a diversity and inclusion perspective, including the firm's award-winning approach to respect and inclusion. And alongside this focus, Emma devised and implemented numerous targeted interventions aimed at positively impacting from a gender, LGBT plus, and ethnicity and social mobility perspective. And this included early voluntary gender and ethnicity pay gap reporting, which she's going to talk about in a little more detail today. And just to mention that this webinar series is supported by NatWest, so they have kindly stepped in to enable these important conversations to take place. So a big thank you to the NatWest group for doing this. Sandra, over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind invitation. So really thank you for the opportunity to talk today about getting terminology right. So this is an area that I know employers and individuals are really concerned about and have been for a while. So in 2017, I wrote a little booklet called Let's Talk About Race, which I'm going to throw up here. You'll be able to find it on the BITC website. So please, it's free to download. It's just a short booklet. But in 2015, we ran the biggest survey on race in the UK, called the Race at Work Survey. And one of the questions we included was, what do you want to be called? And this was the terminology question, because in my day job, that's what I do. I work with government, I work with policymakers, I work with employers to set the agenda for race in the UK. And I know that every now and again it would come up, oh, I'm not sure, what do we use? What shall we say? Now, there are established terms on race in the UK, which were included in the report, in the survey, as well as, a free text box for people to say, if they don't like any of these terms, what would they prefer instead? And what we found was 1 in 3 didn't care. They were saying, can we move this along? We don't care about terminology. We just want change. I don't mind, use what you want, but can we just start talking about action? And then another third said, actually, I don't like any of the terminology. Call me by my name, call me Black, call me Asian, call me mixed. And then of the other third, the terminologies that exist, of those that existed, ethnic minority came out first. BAME, which is Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, came out second at 16%. And then following that was BME, and that's Black, minority ethnic, that followed. And then people of color, which was a trailing behind a mere 6%. Now, what I've set out there is that it's really clear that there's not a one answer, because there's a theme that people want to feel, number one, like they're valued, like they're included. And therefore, you only need to think about what kind of terminology you're going to use when you're thinking about a public presentation like I'm doing today, or how you're going to write about it. Now, where we are now, so since the brutal killing of George Floyd, and what it has triggered, in that people are now saying, hold on a minute, not only are there disparities in people's lived experience with the criminal justice system, it's at work too, it's engaging with customers and clients, it's engaging with managers and teams, and we want change. So what that has done is brought into sharp focus the absence of Black people around senior tables, be it in government, be it in business, be it in education, and all different kinds of industry. And I would suggest, I can challenge you all to go back and think about your own organizations and look at around the top tables to see, does the representation there reflect what the demographic is in the community? And I think you're going to find that there is also a deficit there. So what this current climate did has drawn attention to the fact that we really need to start talking explicitly about Black people. Now, this was prior to the King of George Floyd. It was almost like taboo. People didn't want to say Black, but now we realize that we must, because if you do not talk about it, how can you measure it? How can you make progress? So it does matter. Now, as I said, some people don't like any of those terminologies. And as I say, you can always use people's names because, as I say, you only need to think about terminology when you're actually trying to discuss publicly. So things I would say to think about. How do you come to the conversation is more important than the terminology. But I would say those of you who are like, but you know, Sandra, what about my employees? What I would say, why don't you ask your employees? So if you have an employee network, ask them what terminology they want to be called. What do they want you to use? Because actually that's your most important population, the stakeholders and people that you work with, and let them pick what they want and then go with that. What I'm actively encouraging employers to do now is actually, rather than use the term BAME, which is Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic, which everybody now hates, just spell out Black, Asian, and ethnic minority, just spell out the words so it's really clear that you're not trying to mask progress. And the reason why this perception has happened is there have been organizations who have said, oh, we've hit our BAME targets, but when they look at it by census category, by the diverse category, there's only particularly sometimes one Asian ethnicity group, and it tends to be people from the Indian subcontinent who are actually represented at the top, and it's not an authentic representation of ethnic minority presentation on boards. So really, really important to capture data and insight in your organization by demographic groups so that you can kind of understand, analyze, look at the lived experience, because what I will tell you now in advance of you doing that, you are going to find one size doesn't fit all. And I'll use an example. I've recently, a few weeks ago, published what I've called the Race at Work Black Voices report. You can also download that from the BITC website. It's all free. What we found, what I did, I stripped out all the responses from Black employees to unpublished data. So this is the first time we've published some of this insight, hearing firsthand what are Black employees saying about work. One of the important things we found was when we asked, can you be yourself? Do you feel you can be yourself at work? Only 66% of Black employees said yes to that question, whereas 70% of white, Asian, mixed ethnicity employees said yes. When we asked the question about, do you get credit for your ideas or for your work? 49% of Black employees said yes to that, but 57% of white, mixed ethnicities and Asian employees said yes. So there's two particular areas there, one around being yourself and feeling like, you know, I can just belong and be authentic. And there's another important area about attribution, about getting credit for your ideas. And when I started this presentation, I talked about the lack of representation, the lack of voice at the top table. Part of that is when you think about there's an attribution challenge. So if you're not seeing, being listened to, not feeling you're being heard, and definitely not getting credit for your work or your ideas, it's hard to progress if you're not seen as somebody generating the ideas, generating the solutions, and having that strong bias for action. So these are some of the things when you want to start talking about why it's really, really important that you start talking about race. I would say come to the conversation curious rather than skeptical. So just be open, and why don't you share, you know, this your ethnicity? What is is there any interesting diversity in your heritage? And one of the things I tongue-in-cheek kind of deal with in the booklet is that question when people say, where do you come from? And you say, I come from, Clapham Junction. And they're like, no, where do you really come from? And I'm like, well, I come from Balham. And, these are two local towns in London. And they laugh because they realize, because what they're saying actually is because I am Black, I can't come from the UK. Whereas I do. I was born there here. My parents came from, migrated from Jamaica, actually. But I was born and educated here, and then so my nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews. So the more communities are staying, have settled, the next generation, they're talking about great-great-grandparents that have come from abroad. So really, this is why it's important that we get comfortable talking about it, that we realize that actually our survey found that 38% of people in the UK said their employer's not comfortable talking about race. And it was people from all ethnicities. So realizing actually and come to the table realizing, hey, we may all feel a bit uncomfortable about this, but we just need to park that, look at the data, get together, put our heads together on purpose and the changes that we want to see, and then move forward together. So I think as an organization, always think about the things you have in common. The reason why you work in the same place often is because you believe in what the organization is doing, you believe in the cause, and those are great unifiers. And then I would say finally something that I want you to think about is about thinking about what I call reverse mentoring or two-way mentoring. The best way to break the ice on conversations is to build connectivity. And I'm encouraging employers and individuals to get into what I call two-way mentoring, reverse mentoring, where particularly senior leaders actually mentor somebody from a different background, because that's how you build connection. You get to hear the lived experience and actually build kind of empathy and understanding. And I would also say, just remember, when you do start to talk to somebody about ethnicity, about race, you may hear things that you think, oh, come on. It might sound unbelievable because it's outside of your lived experience, but it's important that you respect the lived experience. And I'm going to share one more stat before I leave. The Race at Work report, Black Voices, we asked everybody, did they see their ethnicity as a potential career blocker? 33% of Black employees said yes, that they see their ethnicity as a career blocker, and only 1% of white employees said yes. So if you think about 33% and then 1%, think about what creates that perception and belief that it's going to be a blocker. It's created because it has been a blocker. They will be able to tell you, this is when it happened to me before, this is what happened before, this is what happened before, which is why I believe it could be a blocker now. And surely what we want to do is ensure that no matter what survey we run, no matter what country we run it in, when we ask about blockers, it's not about ethnicity, it's about skills, talent, and ability. And those are great unifiers that we can work on together. And as white people want to stand next to Black people as allies, just remember, sometimes it might feel a bit uncomfortable, but that's because the lived experience is different. It's not that anybody's against anybody else. It's just that we're coming from a different perspective. Thank you. I don't know if there's any time for questions. I'm happy to wait to the end.
Thank you, Sandra. I think we'll take the questions a little later, if that's okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much for the remarks. I think a few of those really resonate well with this webinar series, especially the points on being yourself and getting credit for your work. So this is something that we will be exploring in more depth in the retention webinar. So again, we'd like to encourage everyone on the call to register for the rest of the webinars in the series. Also, if you have a look in the Q&A box, you will see that we have posted a link to the booklet that Sandra mentioned. So let's talk about race booklet. So feel free to have a look at that as well. And now we'll go over to Russell. Russell, please take the floor.
Hello, everybody. Hi, hope you can hear me okay. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about anti-racist training and how to sort of roll this out effectively. I think one of the places I want to start really is to talk about all the things that have been happening across the UK, and we see organizations, we see companies, we see CEOs really making statements, taking a stand, pledging money, doing positive action, making sort of pledges of things that they're going to do as a result of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And we've seen particularly our company Diversity Trust a significant increase. I think it's like 700% increase in companies coming to us and saying to us, we want to do some anti-racist training, we want to do some unconscious bias training, we want to do these types of things. And again, it's really this is really important, because some people question the value of this type of training. And for me, today, talking to you in this session, I want to try and get across to you about how to do effective anti-racist training, how to make sure that you can do it in the right way. There is some research to show that the way a company responds to diversity-related events that are seen in the widespread media, George Floyd being one of those, really affects how employees feel, how they feel psychologically safe, and also whether that they believe that racism and discrimination will be dealt with, and how they sort of respond to the authority within the organization. So there's an element that we need to think about is not just the university, but also the individual. And I can see some really clear parallels between the types of conversations that we have to have as an individual and the types of conversations that we have to have as an organization. There's almost a journey and exploration that we need to go through. So some of the similar things, organizations and individuals say, okay, well, we want to help, we want to do something, we want to make a difference, but we don't know what to do. We don't know how to do that. We've got organizations that for the first time have individuals that have been empowered, Black individuals in those organizations that have been empowered to stand up, to speak out. And these are organizations that until recently have saw themselves as inclusive, as humanitarian, as egalitarian organizations. But there's one or two individuals that have stood up and they've just challenged the whole culture, the whole perception, the whole perception of how these individuals, how you as a company see your life and see the work that you do. And in those circumstances, you can do one or two things. You can either deny that and become defensive and say, no, this isn't us, you're wrong, point the finger, and often this happens, that the individual, your performance is wrong, or you're in the wrong organization, and all these kind of things. Or you can sort of slow yourself down, take some time to reflect and think, actually, if systemic racism exists in society for every industry, for every organization, then how can we not be part of perpetuating that systemic racism? How can we not be part of that? If we're part of it, then we can also be part of that solution in terms of challenging those. So we have to go, as a company, have to go on that similar journey. Why do we want to do anti-racist training? I think that's the most important thing to ask ourselves. Do we want to do it to look good? Do we want to do it to stop there being a backlash from staff? Do we want to do it because people will view us in a certain way, or we can sort of perhaps hold on to a history or to some sort of perception of our company, or develop a perception of our company that perhaps didn't exist before. It's really important to understand that. Either way, whatever reason you decide to go on that journey, that doesn't have to be the same. The stable reason doesn't have to be the consistent reason that you stay there. And often we found when we deliver our training that perhaps some of these organizations are being tokenistic. They're doing this one-off anti-racist training, 2-hour to 3-hour training, with the intention of never doing anything else again other than that training. But after we've done the training, if you do really successful, really powerful training, what you've found is that these individuals and the staff are empowered to really take it to the next stage, to do more. So it's a really important conversations to have. I think one of the big questions is about how well you know your organization. What part of the journey are you in your organization? How much work have you done previously? Are we building on perhaps some good work that's been done around diversity and multiculturalism and inclusive leadership? And is it sort of a logical step? Are we at a really basic level? Are we at a basic level where we need to bring someone in an organization just to raise the awareness that these things exist and nothing else? Or are we going to move forward? Are we going to provide a training that provides that awareness, that provides that lived experience, that also at the same time enables individuals to have the tools, to have the skills and the ability to do something about it, to take action? And that's what anti-racism is about for me. It's about taking action. It's about moving forward, accepting that these things exist and wanting to do something about it, wanting to visibly do something about it and not give up and consistently keep doing those things. And training and development is just a small part of this process. But we're talking about a change. We're talking about a cultural change for your organization. And we have to understand where we are in that process. So is it an individual change that we're looking at? Is it an individual level? Is it a team level? Is it an organizational level, or is it a systemic level that we need to look at? And do we need different approaches at each one of those levels? So that's a really important thing in terms of you really kind of looking into your organization and really understanding the dynamics, the different cultures that exist. I often speak to senior managers and leaders, and you'll have a different perspective in your organization than perhaps just one tier below or on the ground level. They'll all have different experiences and different perceptions of what your organization is and what your organization stands for. So I recommend doing some sort of audit, some sort of survey with those staff to find out what they think you stand for and the things that you've done. So in terms of good equality and diversity training, for me, I think it's not appropriate just to do these one-off training, to do these awareness sessions. We need to do more. And if you've got a good provider, got a good trainer coming in, then you'll be encouraged and you'll be supported to do more than that. In fact, further than that, what we try to do is encourage staff to challenge the organization. We encourage staff to do what's in their power, to do what they can in terms of what they can achieve, to be realistic, but also to hold the organization accountable for the things that they said that they would do. So if you do good equality and diversity training, 6 months down the line, when maybe some of the fire behind Black Lives Matter again dies down, or people start to forget about the name of George Floyd, hopefully not. When these members of staff come to you and they say, do you know those big statements you made? Do you know these big actions you took? What have you done? What happened? And we want to encourage staff to challenge it. We want you to turn around and say, yeah, we did this and we did this and we did that and we did this and we're still doing these things. We're still building that trust. So it's really important. For me, also, good anti-racist training includes lived experience as well as professional experience. You have to bring people in that can give you their lived experience. Sometimes those people in the training that we're delivering training to have never experienced this. It's a completely different world, a completely different concept to them. We have to somehow find a way of them stepping in our shoes, of experiencing the things that we've experienced, opening those eyes, becoming woke in a sense, in those particular ways. Again, it's really important for you as an organization to decide whether you're going to go for a top-down approach or go for a bottom-up approach. There's a lot of value in top-down approach. We need to have that leadership buy-in. We need to have a change sponsor, an equality change sponsor from those perspectives. But if you know your organization, if you know there's going to be resistance from the top, there's going to be people that they're going to be challenged, don't want to be challenged. It might be better to start from the bottom up, to galvanize those members of staff, to make sure you capture that fire, that energy from those individuals, to try and force change in those organizations. So again, that's really important. So you also want to be, and this is one of the things that Sandra talks about in some of her work, is an organization that encourages staff to talk about race and racism, to learn about each other, but also to be feel free to make mistakes, but without feeling judged. In those circumstances, people want to do those sort of things. There's been a lot of criticism of anti-racist training, talking about white privilege. Again, I talk about white privilege. We talk about white privilege in the training. I think for me personally, and this is my personal opinion, I I don't want to spend too much time talking about white privilege. I don't want to spend too much time in that space of guilt and that space of criticism. We will talk about it, but for me, we need to move quickly beyond there and start looking at the solutions of what we can do. So talking about how we can become allies, how we can become anti-racist and use sort of active bystander initiatives in those particular ways. The last thing I want to mention, particularly around this area, is that a lot of people are linked in now in the organizations, particularly around stuff around inclusive leadership. And there's a big debate in inclusive leadership about how equality and diversity should be embedded in that. And I think this is a parallel conversation that we're having around anti-racism. Some people do it sort of retrofit. So you've got a course, you think, okay, I'm going to fit in anti-racist here. That might fit in this particular course, in this particular subject, or this particular module that we're doing. Some people may do a separate module just on equality and diversity. But what we want, ideally, is for anti-racism, anti-racist approaches, and equality and diversity to be embedded all the way through that process, embedded through that thinking, embedded through that practice. So that's really important. So as I mentioned before, one-off awareness training is not good, it's not effective. But if it helps to start the conversation, to spur the conversations off, then that's brilliant. You need to know the sort of company that you're working for and the cultures that exist. And, you know, accept that you're not going to fix these things in a 2-hour session, a 2 to 3 hour session. We need to put key performance indicators in, and we need to start measuring these things. So those are the key takeaways for me. I'm happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russell. Really good points there, especially on, you know, this fact that one size doesn't fit all, and that each business needs to decide for themselves whether it's going to be a bottom-up or a top-down approach. Hopefully we can go into a little more detail about these audits that you mentioned, and you know, just making sure that companies do more than one-off trainings in the Q&A. But before that, we'll just pass it over now to Emma, who's going to be talking about Deloitte's approach to ethnicity pay gap reporting. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you very much. And it just fabulous to listen to the other two speakers, and so much of what they said has resonated. So what I did want to start off with was to say that I am talking to you today in relation to my my role, as Carla said, my role as managing partner for talent for Deloitte in the UK period. So between 2019 and 2019, I now am honoured to hold the position of inclusion leader, but that's for a conversation for a whole different day. So I'm going to talk about, I've got 10 minutes about an awful lot when it comes to the work that we did in the UK on ethnicity pay gap reporting. Now, for those of you that don't know Deloitte, just a really quick snapshot. In the UK, around 18,000 people. We're a professional services organisation. We focus on audit, tax, consulting, and financial advisory, and we only have our people. They are our asset and our mainstay. So I'm going to take you back in time, and I'm going to talk about our journey towards ethnicity pay gap reporting, the sort of why we did it, how. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to actually touch on some of the areas that Sandra and Russell have also touched on, because they're an important part of this. So I'm going to take you back to 2015, when we started our focus on respect and inclusion, basically all around culture and culture change. Now, this was prompted by poor statistics that we had on gender. And why? Because that was the only thing we could measure at that time, and more about that later, but also from feedback that we had had from around 500 of our people, so primarily women, and also others that were in underrepresented minority groups. And we'd had that feedback during listening groups that we'd held in 2014, a year earlier. Now, these groups were informal, and the whole aim was the people that attended them was to tell us how it felt to work in our firm. And I think to Russell's point, to listen. We knew we were losing people because of culture, and we needed to better understand what that actually meant. Now, I had a fair idea, but you know, can't base an entire strategy around my views. So when you came to those groups, we basically heard exactly the same stories within a matter of minutes, and our people were telling us that from time to time, they were experiencing microaggressions. This word we're hearing more and more about. It was a word obviously been in use for around 50 years, but it's occupying our media space more and more these days. So this seemingly small acts have a massive impact, intentional or unintentional, which adversely impact underrepresented minorities. Now, so this led to our focus on culture and specifically on respect and inclusion. We talked a lot about diversity in our organisation. We've done some things. It had not moved the bar particularly at all. And so we wanted to take this right back to the thing that really mattered, which is culture. How our people felt when they came into our building every day and in every interaction within our organisation. We were very clear that you can't get diversity without inclusion, and you can't get inclusion without respect at all times. So I want to also now sidestep slightly, and I want to quickly set the scene when it comes to data, because it's really important. So back then we had targets for gender. As I said, it was the only thing we could measure at that stage, and we'd set those in 2012. When I took over my role towards the end of 2013, I realised the sad view that I couldn't actually set any other target, for example, on race, because we didn't have the base data. And how can I set a target on something where I don't actually know where we are at that point in time? So we really needed better disclosure of data for all protected characteristics. But the problem was, and I very strongly believe this, that our people first needed to trust us, which brings us right back to culture and the focus on respect and focus on inclusion. So let's just talk a little bit about what we actually did, and then we'll go into a bit more about data and pay gap reporting. So respect and inclusion itself was launched, as I said, in 2015. Now, it was led by our CEO from the top of the organisation, and there was a clear focus on microaggressions when it came to all underrepresented minorities. So a real focus on disrespectful behaviour that was not acceptable. And this actually became our major inclusion focus. Now, it was accompanied by various targeted interventions, but this was the bedrock, the foundation of all that we did. So when it came to respect and inclusion, in addition to things like our Ask Yourself film, which is on YouTube, we did leadership sessions. And to Russell's point, they weren't just one-off. We then carried on around with sessions and messaging. We actually put 6,000 people in 9 months through various sessions. We created new ways to speak up. And we actually took action as well. And once Respect and Inclusion had launched and embedded, we then knew we had a chance to get that precious data. So in May 2016, we held a data amnesty. Very strong term for it, but effectively that's what it was. And we launched it with very clear messaging from me and our CEO on its intent and the need for it, why it was so important. And it was fairly impassioned messaging. And that really, as a result of that, we went from less than half of our firm disclosing their data to 85%, if not a bit more. And we covered all protected characteristics and also social mobility. Now, it's really important to know that without this data, we couldn't cut very critical management information by protected characteristics. So the data was important for so many things, including that we could actually look at things like engagement data, survey data, by protected characteristics, and then also that we could set targets. So what did our data tell us? And this is really important. I'm going to be very open with you. And it's not good. This back in 2017, the picture was not good. So by 2017, our inclusion scores overall had really increased. So in a year, they'd increased by 2 percentage points, which is quite significant. But when we actually came to be able to look at it from an ethnicity perspective, engagement scores for our Black, Asian and minority ethnic employees were significantly lower than their white counterparts. Now, obviously, we couldn't just stop there. So we drilled down into other data, including data relating to recruitment and performance processes, and those findings were stark. So we noted that 18% at that time of our firm comprised Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, but less than 5% of those were at partner level. And actually, when it came to Black individuals, it was way lower than that. Applications from Black, Asian and minority ethnic students were 6 percentage points lower than for white students. And those applicants were scoring lower at each part of the process, apart from the second interview. Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff were less likely to be rated role model. Now we've got rid of ratings now, but in the old system, that was the case. And Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff rated us less favourably in our engagement survey when it came to things like their development and progression. Now, I'm a great believer, and I think Russell mentioned this as well, I'm a great believer in walking in the shoes of others. And honestly, I don't have all the answers. I've only walked in my own shoes. So it was important to me to hold focus group and discussion groups with Black, Asian, minority, ethnic employees of all levels within our organisation. And these groups were amazing, incredible, were really honest, open, and told us some really valuable things. I'm going to share some of those now because they're important. They told us they didn't see people who they believe are like them at the top of the organisation, and therefore they didn't see a place for themselves, and that they couldn't access role models that they really wanted. They really wanted targets. They saw we had them for gender, and they were asking, well, why aren't we having the same for ethnicity? They wanted transparency. So they wanted the same as gender pay gap reporting. We were early gender pay gap reporters. They wanted to know why we couldn't do that from an ethnicity pay gap perspective. They wanted to normalise the conversation. And this, I think, comes back to Sandra's point. They actually felt people were scared of offending them by engaging with them, and they wanted to try and to change that. They believed unconscious bias exists. And they told us that they were tired of hearing things like, it's just not your year, when they were having evaluation conversations. They believed their managers didn't understand them. They felt they didn't have a voice. And they felt that despite the focus on respect and inclusion, which they did tell us was working to an extent, they were still encountering some disrespectful behaviours like, can I touch your hair? So in 2017, our Founders Executive agreed and ratified the Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Action Plan. This comprised various interventions, some of which have been mentioned today. So we introduced targets, and we actually introduced those in line with the Parker Review, reverse mentoring, external mentors. We introduced changes to our recruitment approach, and critically, we agreed to report our ethnicity pay gap because we had the data and we could. Now, I would say since 2017, the firm in the UK has built on this action plan, and most recently with their Black action plan that was announced around a month or so. Now, we voluntarily reported our ethnicity pay gap in 2017, 2018 and 2019, and we will continue to do so every year. We used the gender pay gap methodology because there wasn't another one. We also reported an additional stat in 2018 and 2019, which is our total earnings gap, which due to a quirk in gender pay gap reporting meant that we couldn't include equity partners who are owners of the business in our calculation. We felt it was really important that we could, so we had a whole firm approach. So how did it go? Well, 2017, we learned a lot, probably about how not to do it. We had a bit of a comms mess up for our intranet article. Somebody somehow in the editing process has removed a vital piece of information explaining how the gap was calculated, what it is, the causes of it, and that really didn't help. We didn't educate or talk to members of our Black, Asian, and minority ethnic community enough. Again, in terms of the fact we were publishing, what it was, what it meant for them, how it's measured. We decided to do a soft launch, which at the time we believed was right because the timing coincided with the release of our impact report. That was a mistake. People thought we were trying to bury it, and we didn't produce a narrative. So that changed in 2018, 2019. We took full control of communications. We featured articles on the intranet. We engaged much earlier overall. We briefed our multicultural network and members of our Black, Asian and minority ethnic advisory group that I'd established. And we did that in well in advance, and they became amazing ambassadors. We briefed talent leaders, members of the executive, published a full narrative. Basically, most things that we got wrong the first time around, we changed. And it meant that it was far more successful. And actually, that any negativity that had been from 27 but turned into real positivity and pride. So finally, I want to share some important points we learned. This is really, really, to me, this is critical. So firstly, the importance of data disclosure. And I have sat round numerous tables, particularly during the ethnicity pay gap consultation, where I've heard people say, oh, we don't have the data, we don't have the data. Well, we need the data. And you know, for us, we had a stark difference between 2017 and 2018 when we reported, because we'd managed to get that data and then actually taken our eye off the ball a bit. And with attrition, with new joiners, we had a 10 percentage point gap in terms of what, you know, the data that we were working on. It meant we couldn't do like for like. So it's so important. We also determined what classifications to use very early on and stuck to them, because again, we've got to do like for like. Now, we only got disclosure, and I really would emphasize this, in 2017 because of trust and culture. So the focus on respect and inclusion, and this as part of something really much bigger, was absolutely critical. I don't think we'd have got the levels we did without doing this. And to that end, Ethnicity Pay Gap report sat as part of a wider action plan that was ratified by the leadership of our firm. It was communicated, and we built that action plan through analysis of the data and listening to our people. You know, they told us, so we had to act. It was absolutely right. They were giving us the solutions. So the plan and ethnicity pay gap reporting was led by the CEO and me. It was not seen as an HR thing. It was seen as who we are. It was our business. It was critical for change. Just very briefly, a couple of final points on the gap itself. Where if you are going to report your ethnicity pay gap, communication is critical. Explain what it is. People often jump to this being about equal pay. In some cases it is. For our organisation, that was not the case. It was the shape of our organisation and the stark fact that we do not have the representation at senior levels that we really must need to get to. Briefing stakeholders, really important before you release. Don't do what we did in 2017 and get that badly wrong. Own the narrative report, own it. It gives you a chance to talk about it, why it's important, what you're doing, and be proud of what you're doing. We used it also to identify issues, and I cannot tell you this is a really effective tool. It identified things that we didn't know and challenges that we weren't aware of. Now, 2018 and 2019, just to finish, had a massively positive impact. We are seen as being transparent on this. We are seen as doing the right things. We're seen as having a lot more to do, but we are seen as being transparent and taking this seriously. So overall, this has been such a positive thing for us to do, and I would wholeheartedly encourage any other UK company that wants to bring about change to really look at doing the same thing. And that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Emma. And yeah, special thanks for being so open and transparent about what you've been doing in Deloitte about this. So I'm aware that we are running out of time now, so I think we'll go straight into the Q&A session. And I think, Sandra, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to leave at 3 p.m.
I was going to say, I'm going to have to go now because I've got another meeting. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm going to have to leave. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Sandra, very much. So I think we'll jump into the Q&A session with Emma and Russell now. So let me just browse through some of the fantastic questions we've received so far. So we have a question from Hannah, which I'm hoping Russell will have some insight on. So Hannah is interested in whether there's a difference between unconscious bias training and anti-racist training. And I think on that point, we also have a question about whether unconscious bias training is actually effective, and what can be done for companies to really benefit from this training. So Russell, over to you if you have any insight on this.
Thank you, Carla. I'm not sure if people can see me, actually. It's having some issue with bringing my image up, so I'll probably just try and respond like this, and hopefully it'll work in a minute. Yes, in terms of anti-racist training, is far beyond unconscious bias training. It is part of it. So we talk about racial bias in that session. I think there's the dynamics between conscious bias, structural bias, and unconscious bias. There's a lot of links between those three areas, and some, and some closer than others. It's just a part of the anti-racist discussion that takes place. So they are two different things. In terms of whether unconscious bias training is I'm not sure if I heard it right, but for me, is it mandatory? If it's mandatory, then the issue. So some real interesting evidence out there that demonstrates that even if you can't get rid of bias, even if bias existence is so embedded, the mere focus on bias, the mere point of monitoring it, of trying to find it and identify it and assess whether it exists, actually it helps to eliminate bias in itself. So you may have individuals that perhaps are reluctant to attend these sessions, but there is some interesting evidence to demonstrate that that actually that training probably could do a lot. That could do them a lot of good.
Thank you, Russell. We have another really great question. So if a business did not say anything in the moment or when other companies initially spoke up about supporting BLM, Black Lives Matter, is it too late to make a public statement now? So happy for you, Emma, to take this question, or Russell.
Yeah, so thank you. And I don't think it's ever too late. Honestly, your people are do not underestimate how much your people are sitting there waiting to hear. And so from my perspective, it's never too late.
Great. Russell, did you want to add anything on this?
No, I completely agree. I don't think it's too late. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to add. You just need to take some action to show staff you're doing action. I think there was a question in there about what else you could do. Making sure you have those anti-racist policies, making sure you put together an anti-racist action plan, and just reaffirm your position as an organisation. So most definitely, it's not too late.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll take one last question before we move on to Emma. Emma will be doing a call to action in just a few minutes. But before we get to that, we have a question from Elaine. So how can organizations help to normalize conversations about race in the wider society, and in particular in educating our children? So I think this ties in quite nicely with another question from Simon, who's asking, how do you really get this culture change to happen? I think, Emma, you were talking about this, about making this culture change within Deloitte. So how do organizations and companies get started on this?
It's I think it's one for a whole different webinar because it's huge. I think there is much about leadership, knowing that this needs to happen. I couldn't have achieved anything that I achieved if my CEO had not known that we needed to do this. And I think, this comes back to some of the points Russell was making. Put people in some training, you can create a few policies, but it's actually the experience, it's the lived experience, it's how people are treated every day. So there's a lot that needs to be done, but equally don't look at this as too daunting. And, for us, it's been a very long journey of quite small steps to get there. So, and then in terms of normalizing, we've done things like produce how-to guides. I mean, it seems really basic, but Sandra, the brilliant work that Sandra does at BITC and the team and the information that they publish, take that, use that. But to me, it's just have those conversations and try and have them without fear.
Thank you, Emma. And thank you to everyone who's been sending in questions. Really appreciate it. And I do apologize for not getting to some of you. We had a limited time for this webinar, but thank you very much for the interest, and do engage with us on future webinars. So Emma, it'd be great to hear a few just final remarks from you. We've heard a lot of businesses, and a lot of businesses have reached out to us asking, what do we have to do in this space? What do we have to do to support the BLM movement? So a few final remarks from you, a call to action would be really great, I think, for all the businesses tuning in today.
Yeah, thank you. So I look, I want to take you back again to what our people told us in 2017, and I'm being very open with you, but I think this is really important. I honestly don't believe this is likely to be much different to other organisations that have been having conversations recently following the killing of George Floyd. So what did our people tell us? They didn't see people like them at the top of our firm. They couldn't access role models. They wanted targets. They wanted transparency. They wanted to normalise the conversation. They were experiencing unconscious bias. They believed their managers and leaders didn't understand them. They felt they didn't have a voice, and they felt that they encountered disrespectful behaviours. Now, many of you will have held or taken part in race listening groups over the last few months, and this is good. But I also think we need to make sure that then leads to action. And we need to look at those as employers, look at those points raised in these groups and come up with solutions and formalise them as part of a leadership signed off action plan. And like my own firm has done, both now and back in 2017. Now, some of these issues can't change overnight. I wish they could, but they can't. But you know what? We can start to make progress. We can only do that if there is real buy-in and we listen and we come up with actions. I know a number of my Black friends, are watching what's going on within their companies with interest. And they do want to know that there will be more than lip service given to this. And therefore, an action really will be taken to start to change this. So I would say, please take what you've heard today and act on it.
Thank you so much, Emma. Very, very helpful and very insightful. Steve, over to you for some final remarks.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Russell and Sandra in absentia. It's been really a fantastic session, in my opinion. I've certainly learned a lot. The biggest takeaway, I suppose, well, a few, but definitely starting with, I think it's never too late to get started. I think that's really critical. Those that have hesitated out of fear of saying the wrong thing need to get stuck in and start moving their organizations on this agenda. And I think that leads to the second key question, is about knowing your organization in terms of race. I think this is an area we've just not been having those conversations. And so start with a conversation, start with gathering some data, but getting an understanding of your organization. And to Russell's point about it being different at every level, don't make an assumption that just because you've spoken to a few people at one level in the organization that you've got a proper picture. I think it's really key through that understanding of the organization to then move on to giving your employees the skills and the knowledge and the permission to be anti-racist within your organization, and then to start transforming your whole organization to become an anti-racist organization. I think we've only scratched the surface today with just as Russell pointed out, a couple of hours is not enough, but we hope we've given you something to think about, and we can point you in the direction of some resources that can help you on your journey. And certainly amongst those resources will be the upcoming webinars in our series. Now, I'm thinking, though, that I'm going to hand back to Carla now to talk about that. So I'll just say once again, thank you to NatWest Group for supporting the webinar series. That's tremendously appreciated. And thanks again to all of our speakers and to all of you for joining us today. Back to you, Carla.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to all of our panelists today and to everyone tuning in. So this series will continue on the 14th of October with a session around recruitment, and then we'll move on through October and November with 3 additional sessions focused on retention, advancement, and changing corporate culture. So I won't go into too much detail on each one of these. We've explained them before, and you can find more information about them on our website. So if you go onto UN Global Compact Org UK upcoming events, you can find the registration links for all of these events and more details about each one of the events and the speaker lineup on there. So again, thank you all very much for tuning in, and I hope that you've learned something today, and I hope that you will join us for the rest of the session. Thank you very much.